Uh, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulihil Kareem. Amma ba'd. Welcome everybody to another exciting and very important and critical podcast with Dr. Ahmed Kameel. Uh, it is the podcast about the decolonization of the currency and of the monetary system and how it impacted the
Malays, the Malay economy.
yeah. Let me just redo the introduction. Give me a second because I think I had two things on. Okay.
Okay. Mm.
I Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala Rasulihil Kareem. Amma ba'd. Welcome everybody to another very exciting podcast about the decolonization of the currency, where we'll uncover how colonial legacies still control our wealth, our banks, and our future. Today's episode dives deeply into the silent and yet silent, yet devastating tools of colonization, the banking system, the monetary system, and how it impacted our Muslim legacies and Muslim countries. Particularly, the our case study in this particular podcast will be about Malaysia. Our discussion is with Dr. Ahmed Kameel, and actually was inspired by his groundbreaking was as well, whose research exposes how the Malays, once prosperous and land-owning people, were systematically excluded from wealth through colonization and interest-based loans, and how the rigged banking system started early in the mid 1800s. It still impacts the people today. Joining us today again, as I said, is a eminent scholar. Thank you so much again, Professor, for joining us. He's
Thank you.
a voice in reshaping the way we understand economy and money, especially from the Islamic perspective. He's a distinguished economist, author. He was a former dean of Institute of Islamic Banking and Finance in the International Islamic University of Malaysia. He's a PhD in finance, expert in Islamic economics, monetary theory. Author of many books like The Theft of Nations, Real Money, and the Fiat Money and the Economic Degradation of the Malays, which is basically the one of the inspirations for this particular podcast. His scholarship and his work and his studies research exposes how the interest-rate fiat currency system, which was introduced by the colonials, is used as an instrument of control and continue to erode the economic foundations of the indigenous Muslim communities throughout the Muslim world. So thank you so much, Professor, for joining. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, Brother Reza. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it's always a pleasure and I'm honored and I'm grateful to you for taking out time to discuss this very important topic that is not discussed as often, which is the impact of uh, colonial monetary system on the Muslim world, and how whenever we normally talk about colonialism, we talk about it mostly from the political perspective, or we talk about it more from a military perspective on how there were wars and how there were like political alliances, but nobody really pays attention to how money and the banking system was used as an instrument to colonize the Muslims and to basically deprive them of their skill set and the economy and the natural economy, organic chemistry we had, organic economy we had throughout our 1400 years of history. So thank you so much.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
So, Reza, shall I start or?
Please, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brother Reza, for the introduction. This topic is actually, fiat money. The topic I'm presenting is fiat money and the degradation of the economy of the Malays. Yeah, you can see the slides. Yeah,
That is correct. Yes, Professor, we can.
No, this topic I wrote it quite some time ago. It's almost like more than 10 years ago when I was
Mm,
working in the National Islamic University. I highlighted this issue, observing the dynamics, the political dynamics that was happening in this country. Yeah, that what we see today was actually rooted in what was yesterday. That was my,
right,
to to show the link. So here I'll try my best to show how the colonial monetary system actually impacted particularly the Muslim community in Malaysia. But the mechanism is actually, you can relate it to throughout the world. It's happening everywhere. And I'll give you some links to the kind of examples.
sure.
So I come from southern. My forefathers, my forefathers come from South India, southern India, and we
Hmm.
were traders. So we were trading between India and Malaysia. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So we were traders, and then normally that's why you see the Indian Muslim community kind of in Malaysia, kind of concentrated in the port areas. Penang Island has a port, and then
Mm,
like Malacca, Singapore. So these are the major ports of the time: Penang, Malacca, Singapore. And also in yeah, in state called Perak. There's also a port called Lumut. So that area also, yeah. So but that's a smaller area. So our people are in it. So I would like to show you how Indian Muslims and other traders were all affected by the colonial system. I'll try to. So we regard Malaysia from the southern Indian people. Malaysia is a land of milk and honey. It is a lot of opportunities that time, and even today. I would still say Malaysia is a beautiful country to live in. Even though it has its challenges and problems. So our people came here for that, you know, um, good business opportunities and education, you know. So I started even my education in Malaysia from my primary. So to understand this link between the degradation of the Malay and Muslim economy related, how it is related to the monetary system, we need to understand some principles. The first is fiat money, which I've highlighted in the last podcast. Yeah, Brother Reza, yeah, it's simply money that is not linked to anything that's real. That means money that's not backed to gold or any commodities. So we call that fiat money. So paper money, electronic money of today are all fiat money. Then number two, there's an exponential money growth in the present system. So if you check the data for I also highlighted this in the last podcast that if you look at the monetary, the statistics of the monetary aggregates in any country, you will find there's always an exponential growth of money in the country. And the third one is the meaning of financial inclusion. Financial inclusion is basically how much the people are linked to the financial system of the country is financial inclusion. So what is that? That means the financial inclusion is necessary for you to be to grow economically in a
mm,
more efficient way. In other words, in the modern world, the use of money actually accelerates economic well-being compared to a society like, for example, if you see people who live in the jungle as the aborigines and things like that, when they do not have a financial system, when they do not use money like the present money, so their financial inclusion will be very low. And then you find the economic well-being, their standard of living also to be low. You know, so so you need to be financially included so that you can take advantage of the liquidity provided by the system and the efficiency that it provides, so that you can grow economically faster. Okay, so these are the simple three principles, and then this will highlight how the we Muslims particularly also, and everyone also who are victims of this present monetary system. Okay,
yes.
so I already mentioned what is fiat money. So to give you an understanding of fiat money again, I mean everybody likes money, right? Is there anyone who doesn't like money? Right? What? So because we from childhood we have been conditioned. Or if I have a few cents or a ringgit or a dollar, we can go and buy sweets or candies and things like that, right? So you from small childhood, you know the value of money, even though it's paper money, because you can get your ice cream or your candies, using that. So everybody loves money. Is it illegal to keep money? Definitely not, yeah? Because we use money to purchase things that we like. But is it illegal to produce money? Oh, yes, it's illegal. You
Mhm.
can't produce money at home. But if people like something and it's not illegal to keep that thing, generally it's not illegal to produce the thing, right?
Okay. Okay.
Anybody can. But why is it that producing money is now illegal? The reason is there's something called Sinoraj. What is Sinoraj? It is the pre-purchasing power one gets through from fiat money, from the first use of the money, from the first use of the money. So if let's say a counterfeiter, one who prints money at home, for example, when he prints this, let's say a note like this, this is a 20 ringgit note from a Malaysian currency. If
Right.
someone prints this at home, right? This note at home, then it's just the cost of printing maybe about 20 cents, but then it gives you 20 ringgit worth of purchasing power. So you have an additional 19 ringgit of 80 cents of free purchasing power, more than the cost of its production. You see that? So that's we call Sinoraj. So when I
Mm.
use it, let's say to buy, let's say a book from someone. So the bookseller has given me the book and I give the paper money to the person. So basically, I got a book practically free because I just printed the money at home, right? But for the bookseller, there's no Sinoraj because he has already given me the book, and this 20 ringgit, he has the right to spend it for whatever he needs. So for him, there's no benefit. But for me, for the first use, I benefit from it. So the additional purchasing power I get from this note, which is more than the cost of its production, is called Sinoraj. So that is the reason you're not allowed to print currency or currency notes at home, right? It's illegal. So that's called counterfeiting, and you can go to just the person can go to jail for that. Yeah. So this is the issue with fiat money, that it has a Sinoraj, pre-purchasing power. This is an old data. Sorry, I didn't get time to update this graph. But this is how you will notice the monetary aggregates almost for any country. If you go and you'll find the monetary growth is always exponential like this. You see that exponential growth?
Yes.
So the growth will be like that, faster than the real economy. That means your real economy, your ability to produce, as I mentioned in the last podcast, your good, your ability to produce furniture, the real cars and things like that. It won't grow like this. It will be maybe slightly exponential because of the population growth, slightly exponential because of the technological progress and so on. But the monetary aggregates, they always grow much faster, which means they cause inflation in the system. So inflation that happens, it is by design of the monetary system actually, right? So when this inflation means price of everything goes up around us. So that's why we say the cost of living basically keeps rising. Cost of living keeps rising in the present monetary system when the money is fiat money, right? Because it's easily now having that in background, I want to show you, Islam in Malaya. Now, Islam, if you see this graph here, I mean the diagram here, you see it came to this part of the world. This is Malaysia, Indonesia is here. It came from Yemen, basically. The Yemenis, if you sit on a boat in Yemen, the winds will take you to either Kerala, you see the Kerala, or
Hmm.
if you go slightly south, you reach Sri Lanka, or you reach Sumatra, Aceh.
Oh.
So that's the reason by 7th century, which is the century Islam began, Islam has already reached Sumatra. Because if you sit on a boat, it will take the winds will take you there. You know. So the northern part Aceh got Islam earliest. And in India also, even before northern India got Islam, the southern Indians in Kerala got the Islam first, before northern. Many people think it is through the conquest from the north, Islam
Mhm.
was spread. No, the first was actually in Kerala, because the Yemen is you sit on a boat, it'll go a boat will land there, you see. Then the Indian Muslims, southern Indian Muslims, they brought also Malaysia Islam to the Peninsula Malaysia in the 12th century, which is much later, right? So you can see this is how Islam spread. So basically, what I'm trying to, at that time, the Malays, they were mostly peasants. They what do you call the farmers? They owned the lands and everything. They're very good farmers, hardworking farmers. And Islam was brought by both the Arab traders. That's why in Malaysia you have this Al Junaid, Al Atas, and all those and the Indian Muslim traders. There are two. One is called the Americans, and the one the Routers, the Indian Muslim. So the Yemeni traders and the Indian Muslim traders, they formed like they provided the international trade component to Malaysian economy, while the Malays, they provided agriculture and all other, agri-based. So that's how Malaysia was, the Malaysian economy was based upon in those days. And then Islam was flourishing both in Indonesia and Malaysia at that time. Then what happened was, this is timeline I would like to show you. Then, yeah, you see, in 7th century, the Arabs brought Islam to Sumatra. 12th century, you saw the Indian Muslims bringing also Islam to Malaya. But Islam also came from Sumatra when the one of the prince, Hindu prince from Sumatra, he established what the Malay Sultanate in Malacca in the 15th century. So the Malay Sultanate, the sultans of all the states, started from Malacca in the 15th century in Malaysia. And he embraced Islam. When Cheng Ho, Admiral Cheng Ho from China,
Okay.
when he was a Muslim during the Ming Dynasty, he brought a huge fleet of the Chinese junks, and then he well for goodwill purposes, not to conquer like the Western people. So he came on goodwill, and Parameswara must have been, what do you call that, man? So he embraced Islam. Parameswara embraced Islam after seeing the grandeur of Admiral Cheng Ho.
Mhm.
Then and there was a good relationship between China and Malaya at that time. And in the mid 15th century, even one of the sultans, he married a Chinese princess, Hang Lipo, her name in Malacca. Now comes the 18th century, 1786. The British began settlement in Penang. So this is where all our problems are going to start. 18th century, 1786. Then in 1826, then in the 19th century, which is about 40 years since they came. So then Penang, which is a port, Malacca, which is a port, and Singapore also port, they declared them as states settlement. State settlement. And in 1860, this is when I would say Mr. Dajjal set his, because in 1860, they brought in the first mercantile bank in Penang, later became the Hong Kong Bank. So this was the British brought this banking system to Penang first, yeah. And in 1875, the Chartered Bank in Penang too later became Standard Chartered, yeah. So before these banks, 1860, and before this bank, what was money? I think I showed this picture to you in the last I want to show this again. These were the major money that were used in Malaya. 1 ringgit was 20-gram pure silver coin. And there was also a gold, it's called kupang, a gold coin, a small gold coin, which was 0.6 gram. So money in Malaya were mostly, gold and silver coins before the 1860 coming of these banks from Hong Kong. Yeah. So these were the money. So traders were in it. And then you see, for example, you see this picture. I think I did show this picture also before. This is
Oh, yes, you did. Yes, yes.
I didn't, so the see these are the gold coins that were being traded. So the Indian Muslim, this is the Chinese trader, the Malay trader, the Arab trader, the Yemenis and all those. They were all trading like this in a simple, using gold and silver coins. But the British came and then, as I mentioned also in the later, yeah, I'm not sure whether I showed you in the last talk.
Mm.
One moment. Okay, I wanted to show you the note. And this is like one the example of one Malay and British Borneo $1 coin. And this one I showed you this coin, this picture, isn't it? In the last talk, the Reza, yeah. Now
Yes.
this note is very very important. Why? This was exactly about 100 years ago in Malaya, yeah. So you see, the paper money issued was 10,000 ringgit. One piece of paper, 10,000 ringgit, it had a purchasing power of 10 million ringgit of today. 10 million
Wow.
ringgit. So imagine you just print one piece of paper and then you can buy 10 million ringgit worth of land or building or whatever. So this is how, paper money, disadvantaged when they came in, when we were using gold and silver coins as ringgit, the banking system, issued private banknotes, simply pieces of paper as ringgit. So what will be the effect of that, While before the Arab and Indian Muslim traders had vibrant trade and commerce for centuries, they were controlling the international trade in Malaya, including Singapore. Suddenly, they found themselves disadvantaged because some people can easily buy their land. They could easily get their, their whatever they produce by just simply printing some papers. So before this monetary system, we saw Malaysia as a highly tolerant people. Even until today, they're actually highly tolerant people, religious, moral people. Yeah, they were caring, communal people. They're very community-oriented people. That's why they welcomed the Arab and Indian Muslim traders. And unfortunately, because they're tolerant, they also tolerated the colonialists and the immigrants. Yeah, they also
Right.
tolerated the colonial. But the colonialists, they came and built they brought in the banking system. So these are the two major banks that we need to name. The 1860, the Mercantile Bank, later to be a part of Hong Kong, and the Standard Chartered, they issued pieces of paper of money. So when it was a revolving nature of money, because they were lending the money at interest, and Malays and Indian Muslim traders and the Arab traders, we were a bit apprehensive to the riba nature of the banking system. But they're creating money out of nothing. And then, but they are lending the money at interest. So Muslims didn't want to deal with the banks in the first place because it is riba based. So and then and the early 20th century, there was also an influx of the Chinese immigrants into Malaya from China. And they established, interestingly, what we call the Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation. Also, now it's known as OCBC, Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation. So one British-based, and the other one is called Overseas Chinese Banking Corporation, working in Malaya. And these banking systems were giving money. Basically, as you can see, it is to the Chinese and the British or whoever. But then the Malays and the Muslims were financially excluded. Remember, I used the word financial inclusion? They were financially excluded because one is a riba, interest based, which is riba based, right? So I even asked one of my uncles, who was very, who was at that time was a teenager, passed away already. So I asked him at that time why the Muslim traders they didn't involve in the banking and thing. He said at that time they didn't even know that they could borrow money from the banking system. They didn't even know that they could borrow money. Yeah. So this is how basically the the Muslims, three compound, three Malays, the Indian Muslim traders, and the Arab traders,
Mhm.
were financially excluded. But later, in 1938, the Board of Commissioners of Currency Malaya was established, 1938, which had the sole power to issue currency now. So no
Mhm.
more. The banks had no more the power to issue private banknotes were removed.
Mhm.
But then the Board of Commissioners took over, but still the British controlling it. British controlling it. So the British now controlling the issuance of money. And this Board of Commissioners expanded in 1952 to become Board of Commissioners of Currency, Malaya and British Borneo. Sorry, not Malay, Malaya.
Mhm.
Malaya and British Borneo. So that means for Malaysia, or Malaya, at that time it's called Malaya. So Malaya and then the British Borneo to cover, the Brunei and all this. Yeah,
Mhm.
Brunei. So they were controlling the issuance of currency for both these places. Yeah. So you see, the British basically after that controlling the fiat money. That means they are getting the benefit of the Sinoraj. You have to remember that whoever issue fiat money, you get the benefit of its first use. Other people it's illegal for other people to issue the fiat money, only them. Yeah. So the British enjoying the completely the Sinoraj. And the Malays were basically excluded. So what is the implication of this? The implication of this first is hyperinflation because someone is simply printing money. So the price of the land price, particularly you will see the price of land skyrocketing. And I was reading a novel that was written during at that time. People, Muslims have given even land for wakaf of masjids. Masjids those days were just wooden, wooden structures with with atap. Atap is made from these palm leaves. You see, so they have even given
Right.
awqaf. They want to take back the awqaf because when they saw the price of land skyrocketing, wow, what is this? Price rising like this, and then things they've given out as awqaf, they try to even take it back. Hyperinflation, especially the the children, the highest of this wealth, they try to take back the land, and it had implication on the sultanate also. So the sultanate, they could see a loss of sovereignty because suddenly you see people around you, some of the businessmen, the bankers are even becoming much richer than you. So that will put, had put so much, I could see so much of pressure on them, to how to, maneuver this situation. So in 1947, a Malay lawyer, he was educated in London, so he was a bit smart. So he realized, hey, these banking systems are, providing so much of money to the British themselves. They're providing so much of money to the Chinese, particularly Chinese community. But then, no money for the Malays. So he established the Malay National Bank in 1947.
Mhm.
But within 7 months, he was kidnapped and he was murdered in the jungles of Malaysia, and his body was found hanging
On
on a
the tree.
tree with even his expensive watch. If I'm mistaken, it's a Rolex watch, still in intact
It
on
was
his
still
hand. So
very good. Yeah.
yeah, so it was
What
again.
was his name, Professor? If you don't mind.
His name is Maruf Zakaria. It's
M-
on the you can see on
Maruf
the.
Zakaria. Okay.
So there's a road in Kuala Lumpur named after him. Yeah.
Mhm.
So basically, people saw it as a threat to the Malays not to enter into the banking. So that this secret of creating money out of nothing, you know, is not known to the ordinary Malay out there. In fact, most people do not understand this. Even other communities, only the bankers and even bankers of today, they don't understand this usually. That is the banking system that is creating money out of nothing.
Mhm.
Yeah. So basically, after the Maru Zakaria was murdered, the bank also collapsed. with him, So there was no banking system providing liquidity or money for the Malays and the Muslim community. So we were disadvantaged, and the economic dominance of Malays and the Arabs and Indian Muslims, it fell. It was flipped. So then the Chinese community and the others, they came up economically. So and then in 1957, Malaysia got its independence, but within 2 years, the central bank was established. But the central bank, basically it became the issuer of the paper money only. But loans as money was still created by the commercial banks. So the central bank controls the amount of loan that can be created out of nothing through what we call fractional reserve banking system. So fractional reserve banking is practiced throughout the world, not only in Malaysia.
Right.
Okay. So only the paper notes are issued, because you can't see it. Paper notes are issued by the central bank, but most money is created in the form of loans when commercial banks give out, loans,
Mm.
loans to people at interest. So this is the reason why the monetary aggregates grow exponentially. Yeah, exponentially.
Mhm.
I highlighted that in the last talk. So so what happened to the Malays then? So all along, the system was interest based, and financial exclusion of Malays, Arabs, and Indians, I mentioned to you, and the use of fiat money. So there are two things from Islamic perspective, that is actually riba here. One is the interest itself. The second thing is the fiat money itself. If you ask me, I would say the
Mm.
fiat money is a bigger riba than interest. The reason is fiat money is created immediately out of nothing, and it gives you purchasing power.
Mm.
Interest is you have to wait for about a year or something before you can get a little bit of extra over and above that what you have lent, and that is the riba portion.
Professor, just a quick question on this regard, right? Because this is very important point that you just
Uh-huh.
raised about
Mhm.
fiat currency being riba as well, right?
Yes.
So can you please define riba, and then how is that fiat currency riba?
You see, there's one riba and nasiya and riba al-fadl, right?
Right.
Al-fadl is where you lend something and then you get back something in the future at a higher this thing, right? That means not unequal amount. Riba al-fadl, unequal amount of exchange, yeah. Whether it is immediate or even a later period, it is fadl. Riba nasiya is time based. The fact that you are, if you put, let's say I lend you money by the Reza, and then I say, you need to give back my loan at a certain time.
Mm.
The time itself is actually putting a time to return is a riba,
Mm.
riba nasiya. So in a current monetary system where you give something and then you say you have to return to me at a certain time period, normally let's say 1 year, and you have to return to me slightly higher. So that means the present loan system has two types of riba in banking system, both riba al-fadl and riba al-nasiya.
Mm.
Yeah, and if you want to understand the issue of riba in detail, there's a book by Professor Imran Khan Nazi from Pakistan. It's called Islamic Banking and Riba, something like that. I forgot the book. I read it 20 years ago. But
Okay.
that book, I will truly encourage all of you listeners to read that book, and then it will tell you exactly why fiat, because in fiat money, why it is it's actually is riba. But initially, I didn't like the way Prof. Imran Khan Niazi concluded. He concluded, even though from this thing that fiat money is riba, but because in today's world everyone is using it and this thing, so he was saying that we, you know, um, that we may be allowed to use it at the moment. But later, I think he changed his view when there are attempts in order to introduce commodity-based money like dinar and dirham. Yeah.
Hmm.
So there's the thing. So if you want to understand further in detail of why paper money this thing, it goes to the classical works analysis. Is quite deep is analysis, and then you can see why fiat money is actually a riba.
Perfect.
Okay. So with this, these two, this thing. So what happened in it for the Muslims in Malaya? So we were not involved in the ownership of banks because it's a ribawi institution, not in the management. Our people, our children were not working in the banks or being employed in the banks. We were completely excluded from the banking system. Yeah. So in 1969, which is 10 years after, about 10 years after the central bank was established, Malays became so weak, what do you call that, economically, and the other communities became rich because they were financially included. So there was attempts to actually take over the political power in this country completely.
Hmm.
1969. That created a riot, a racial riot in Malaysia. So there was fight between a racial riot. So the Malays became victorious in this thing, and the government, everything that was completely different after that. A
Hmm.
game changer after the racial riot in. It's called May 13, 1969, racial riots. Then when the government came up,
So
then
that
it's
was actually a direct impact of that colonial monetary system, the fiat,
exactly.
and
In fact,
or the classes that it made, the economic classes that it made because of that monetary system, right? Because the Malays, the Muslims, they could not
yes,
participate in the economy
yes, as they used to,
as
you
they
know.
used to.
So it was easily there. We were economically defeated. Like for example, Indian Muslims were in many kinds of trades. We were controlling the pharmacy, even building of roads and things like that. The jewelry, many businesses, paper business and things like that, all overturned when someone else was printing the money using a printing machine.
Mm,
So once you lose your economic power, then there will be tendency to lose your political power, you
mm,
know, gradually. So that's why there was the first Prime Minister of Malaysia, he said that actually the British and they had a plan to take over Malaya within 100 years.
mm,
So 1860 was the time, 1860 was the year, year the first banking system was brought in and they started to print paper money as money.
mm,
100 years from that is 1960. That's when the central bank basically was established around that time. And 1969, the racial riot had taken place, right?
mm,
Mm. So, in 1960s, when the Malays, when they and Muslims, we had no banking account. No, Malay had a banking account. So, you know how salaries, if you were a public servant, if you are a teacher, public servant, you know how you paid your salary? You'll have to go to the post office, you queue, and then you get your salary.
money, your money.
Yeah, yes, because you don't have bank account. So at that time, even people saved also using post office, post office savings account.
Oh, I see.
So that was basically the institution for, that was serving the Malays at the time, post office, right? So in 1974, after the racial riots, 5 years after the racial riots, the post office savings account was converted into a bank because it became large,
It was
converted
very
into a
big.
bank. Yeah, it became Bank Simpanan National, we call it. Uh, Bank Simpanan. Simpanan means savings, So National Savings Bank. Yeah. So
Mm,
that's when the Malays and others this we had our first bank account. Then only the salaries, things like that started to go into the bank account. So for more than 100 years, more than 1 century, the Malays were financially excluded. And that's the reason why the Muslims, basically, if you ask me why the Muslims all together, the Malays, the Indian Muslim traders, the Arab traders, why we lost the economy in Malaysia and why the economy in Malaysia is dominated by
Mm.
other race. Okay. So this is what I'm mentioning. When the first is basically is 1974, right? And then the effect was this: Malays lost their land because easily they can print their $10,000 note and buy your land, while Arab and Indian Muslim traders lost their business competitiveness, right? So after the introduction, the effect of this one is loss of Malay wealth and economic dominance. Next, you also saw the relative wealth of particularly the Chinese community increased tremendously. Now, this is important, the third one. Corruption among Malay politicians and civil servants increased.
Mm.
You have to realize this. This is a very interesting observation. When you have the political power, but you're not controlling, you do not have the dominance in the economy, but the economy is controlled by some other people, you tend to become corrupted because whenever they come to you asking for your business licenses, that and this, then you want to match their economic standard of living, the people who are, coming to you. So there is a tendency to be corrupted. You tend to take money under table and things like that, So this is what, in my opinion, increased corruption among the Malay politicians and civil servants in this country. Because you had power, but you did not have the money.
Mm.
You see? Then third, economic pie of the Malays keep shrinking until today because even though the Bank Simpanan Nasional was established, and then 10 years later the first Bank Islam was established in 1983. So Bank Islam was established, but these banks all were part of the banking systems under the control of the central bank.
Mm.
So they were part of money creators also. That is the problem. They were part of the fractional reserve banking. Therefore, these banks were allowed to create money out of nothing, but they don't lend at interest, especially the Islamic banking, but it will buy things or, properties, a car, home, and things like that, and sell to you at a profit. But the money to buy the property is actually created out of nothing. Still the use of Sinoraj. So that was the problem. So while the well-being was the Malays were improving because they became financially included now after the establishment of Islamic Bank and so forth, and they had banking account and so forth, but they were put 100 years behind.
Mm.
You have to remember that. So they are also growing exponentially, but the Chinese community has gone very far.
Mm.
They've gone very far. So the economic pie, the relative economic pie because of that of Malays actually keeps shrinking because of that. So, and this has brought a lot of socio-economic problems in Malaysia, if you see the youngsters, they can't afford a home, even the salary of the youngsters, all, it's all very low, yeah, low in a sense. And increasingly now, because of that, the Malays, they see the political structure can no longer provide for them, provide for
Mm.
them economic well-being. So more and more Malays are now increasingly inclined towards the opposition, political
Mm.
opposition, because of this, right? And the other implication that I saw is that, and now the Malay, Arab, and Indian traders, they are now involved in the banking too. They think Islamic banking is good and so forth, they enter into the banking for business and economic survival. But indirectly, they have become part of the ribawi system. Remember, I said fiat money itself is riba. So the Islamic banking and others, when they create money out of nothing, to me, it's ribawi in nature. Because when you create money out of nothing, you create inflation in the system. So people who had savings in the system, they are actually, they lose their purchasing power of their savings because the system has created purchasing power out of nothing. So in real economics, you cannot do magic. If you create purchasing power out of nothing, you're actually taking it from somewhere. Where are you taking it from? You are taking it from the savings of other people. So the banking system, whether Islamic bank or this thing today, when they use fiat money system and they're part of the fractional reserve system, they're actually starting their transaction through a theft on the economy. They steal the purchasing power first through inflation, then they buy you a home, a car, and sell to you at a profit. So the contract will look like Islamically correct, or Murabaha contract, or Musharaka contract, and so forth. But the money created to enter into the contract, it is actually through theft. So
Mm,
this you need to understand that, you know. So the Muslims and others, even though they have become more financially included, and their economic well-being is now improving, they have become part of a ribawi system. Okay.
mm,
So this is 1983, the establishment of nine Islamic banks and so forth. Okay. Now this is important. What's the game out of it? Now under the fractional reserve banking system, the commercial bank creates money out of nothing, which is loan in the form of loans, and will give out the loan at interest.
mm,
So this is very important. If you ask me, in the present system, monetary system, who is the most powerful person in a banking? Is actually the loan officers,
mm,
not the chairman, not the lower management. Loan officers. Why? These are the people who are actually creating the money out of nothing and
mm.
giving it out to whom they wish. That means they will, when people apply for loans, they get the applications and they will go through, and it's them who can decide to whom the loan can be given. And when they give the loan,
So
it
they're
is
the
actually,
money makers.
yes, they are the money makers. Yes, they are the actual money makers. That's why if you see people who are intelligent ones in this thing, they always target to become the loan officer. And of course, if you're not a if you're an unethical loan officer, you also get a lot of money under table for to
Man.
approve so forth. So these are the, we have to accept this is how the structure of people, human being behavior is. So if communities, the different communities, different groups, interest groups, if they understand this game, they will try to put their people in as loan officers, because these are the guys who are going to create money, you know, right? Now there's with such a system, you'll be surprised, if you go to even Islamic banks of today, the loan office, many of the loan officers are non-Muslims
Hmm.
because they know that is the most powerful position. Yeah. So there's a continuous loss of relative economic well-being for Malays up until now, until today, actually.
Even
Even
today.
though, even until today, it is continuously deteriorating the economic well-being. That's why even we have to understand, even though the Islamic banks are there and this thing, because you were put 100 years behind, your economic well-being will continuously it will um, shrink. There's 150 years of relative economic degradation. It is a pity when I see Malaysia is facing this. So accordingly, we see more and more socio-economic problems. Especially there's a lot of problems with our youngsters because the system cannot give them good economic well-being, to start their life, in a better
Um,
setting. Yes, Brother Reza.
there's so many questions. So I just want to, complete this first, and then I have like so many questions written down and
Good,
notes.
huh? So let me, you can ask along the way, if
Yeah.
you,
I mean, there are a few of the things that you're talking about, as we're talking about right now. I also want to understand Singapore, right? Because I think the development of Singapore is somewhat, because it was founded what in 1965, and it kind of like excluded from Malaysia and became
correct.
its own
Yes,
entity. So,
yes,
so that particular when it was developed, and
yeah,
again, Singapore is essentially culturally and geographically, it is actually part of Malaysia, right? I mean, it just
right.
became like an independent. So, what
It is,
was the role of economy and the banking in their segregation, if you will? and split up, and like, how did this economics, if this economic system and the banking system played a big part in it?
Yeah, actually, if you compare Malaysia and Singapore, it's about the same. It's about the same, the effect. Because remember the when I mentioned to you the settlement, the state settlement was Penang, Malacca, and Singapore.
Correct.
But Singapore was what do you call had a bigger economic this thing. It was a bigger economic center compared to even Penang because of the port. The port in
Oh,
Singapore is very strategically located,
okay.
right? So that made Singapore is center among the three. I would say a center for the economic growth and activities. Yeah, and many of the Indian Muslims and the Arab traders were there. In fact, a huge portion of the Singapore area, Wakaf land, is called Al Junaid. The Arabs, Al Junaid, site
Hmm.
Al Junaid. They gave it as a Wakaf. And the Singapore government, when it became independent from Malaysia, then they took over all this land, and then until today, the place is still called Al Junaid. If you take a LRT or the train in Singapore, there's a station also called Al Junaid.
So how much of this economic system and the banking system played a part in that?
They became a center because of the international trade, you know,
Hmm.
and they are keeping the accounts for international shipping lanes and things like that. So they grew much faster. They had a lot of, they grew much faster than any, but the effect is still the same. If you go ask general, the Malays in Singapore, they will tell you the same story like Malaysia. Or they were, but Malaysia, Singapore tried to make it know they are very meritocracy and things like that. They actually no. They
Hmm.
actually system actually still favored the Chinese and
Hmm.
so but in Singapore the Lee Kuan Yew he controlled he was a very intelligent politician in my opinion, leader, yeah, but he realized, but he made sure there's not corruption.
Hmm. In Singapore.
Corruption is naturally was lower than Malaysia, because remember I said Malaysia, why the corruption is high, because you had power but you didn't have the money.
Hmm.
But Singapore is the other way, they had power and the money.
Hmm. Right.
See? So the corruption was very low over there, and then he was able to develop Singapore much faster and better because of the location, and is linked to international trade, and things were much better
Hmm.
and much lower corruption. So, but if you see an average Muslim in Singapore and average Muslim in Malaya and other places, actually they are better off because of the spillover effects.
Hmm.
They are better off than a Malay, in Singapore is much better off than a Malay in Malaysia, if you ask me, because my wife is a Singaporean, I can compare that. So I can but they are better off. But when you see within Singapore, oh, there's a huge gap.
Hmm.
There's a huge gap between interracial gap is there. So that is the brother Reza, okay. Now, Malaysia had to, in order to solve this, after 100 years of being put behind, there were a lot of affirmative policies.
Hmm.
The first is immediately after the racial riots, a new economic plan was put in. The government wanted 30% of equity businesses, must be owned by Malays. And they used the term Bumi Putra for the
Okay.
Malays, indigenous people. And then when Tun Mahathir, he became the prime minister, he even changed the education policy for Bhumi Putras, in O levels, O levels, right? When
Yes,
education,
yes, yes. The
in
Cambridge
O
system, yes.
levels, if Malay were to get just one A in any subject, he will send the Malay student to overseas for education, to UK, to America, to the US, and so forth. Just one single A. So he spent a lot of money for the education of the Malays. So he realized education is important for them too. So, and this policy, in my opinion, paid off because many of them who came back, they formed the middle class. You
For
know,
Muslims.
yeah, the huge Malay class was formed,
Hmm.
and until today you can see that. You can see that. So that policy, in my opinion, actually paid off. Yeah. And then Tun Mahathir also, he wanted to make some Malays to become, the ultra rich business group. So he
Mm,
privatized some of the businesses, national GLCs and government businesses that are doing very well, like the telecommunications, like the energy sector and so on. Kind of partly privatized. Yeah. So privatization became money. So these are all meant to improve the well-being of the economic well-being of the Malays. You know. He was expecting by creating some very rich Malays, there will be spillover effect to other Malays, there will be employing Malays and so on. Initially, there was, but gradually they became so self-centric and greedy for among themselves. You know,
mm.
so the ordinary Malay is actually losing out a lot, even though the government, some policies are there to help them out. Okay. So what if you ask me in the entire thing, what is the mistake Malaya did for observing what is going on today? First is in 1860, allowing the issuance of
Mm.
fiat private banknotes. That's first. Is the creating of money out of nothing, and then it is created by private entities.
I have a
Number,
quick
yeah, yeah.
question for that. Is
Mhm.
because it was a new thing for them, right? It was something new in the world entirely.
Yeah,
And
correct.
they, at that time, I don't think they understood what was happening.
Exactly, maybe. But when we do not have the intellectuals of the time to understand,
Mm,
who understood fiat money? Even
mm,
Al-Makrizi and Ibn Khaldun, they highlighted these things even during that time.
mm,
So we need experts to understand the nature of money, what actually is riba. And
mm,
many people also they agree, and I also agree. Riba is among the most misunderstood concept. Even the
mm,
intellectuals they don't understand what actually riba is. That is the reason. Allah said the only in the Quran, the entire Quran, the only issue on which Allah is mentioned, Allah and His Messenger will wage war on Muslims, believers, is on the issue of riba. It's the only issue,
subhanallah.
only issue, you know. And it is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari through Ibn Abbas, the last verse to be revealed in the Quran is on the issue of riba, is it?
Mm,
Not the al yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum, that I've completed your religion today, right?
mhm.
Even after that verse, the
The
verse
riba was there.
to remind Muslims on the issue of
So,
riba.
and that is one of the reasons of Muslims still being in the decline in the
Okay.
this is kind of
So
like a punishment, if you will.
I
I don't know.
totally agree. Why? Brother Reza, I believe today because all our monetary system throughout our Muslim world is based on riba today. So we are probably at war with Allah and His Messenger.
Exact. So the point is like, this halal, and I'm sorry you had a second point to make, but before you do that, the halal branding of the
Hmm.
Islamic financing and Islamic banking system, I
Hmm.
think it has blinded Muslims from like the actualization of this riba, and it
I
is
to-
like what I call normalization of colonization. You know,
yes, I agree with you. We were fooled thinking the introduction of Islamic banking is actually, we are bringing Islamic,
mm,
system in reality. In reality, no. The reality, what the benefit that we got is that people now understand Islamic contracts better.
mm,
Islamic contracts are being taught in universities and so on, So those are good things. Even non-Muslims have become experts in Islamic contracts because of this.
mhm.
But that Islamic banking that we are practicing today, to me, it is a
It's
ribawi Islam.
un-Islamic,
That is my view.
right?
Because I was the dean of the Institute for Islamic Banking and Finance for many years, so I was always at odds with our scholars on that.
Mhm,
So that is the issue. That's why, we have not, because we have not understood the concept of riba, even though it is so much stressed in the Quran and Hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said anybody taking riba is like having incest with one's own mother. Even on
wow.
the side also, yeah, you feel, and yet, how many times have you heard about in khutbah, in Friday khutbah on the issue of riba?
Mm. You're right.
Yeah. Because the even the ulama, they don't understand they
They
don't
don't
know what
understand it.
what to say about it. So we need people like Imran Khan Niazi, Prof. His works to we must master it
That
to.
I
It's a bit
found his book. Yeah,
yeah,
I,
it's a bit
mm.
technical. That's why. That's the reason why people find it difficult, to. So look at it, but it is very well, established. Prof. Niazi will show you that. Okay.
It's called The Concept of Riba and Islamic Banking.
Yes, correct. That is the book. Yes, get it.
I'll
You
get
can
it.
you can go to his website, but I think you need his. He will give it free to you. The if you contact him, the password, and you can download the book free.
Okay, I'll look that up.
Okay. So that is the first mistake, allowing the issuance of fiat money, private banknotes. Okay. Then the second thing is accepting the fiat notes as money itself. Other people, the ordinary public, the ordinary Muslim trader, we accepted the paper money issued by the banks as money, right? And the
Yes.
third is once they have established banking system like that, but not involved in the ownership of the banks, or management or employment in the banks. So totally we had nothing to do with the banking system. So a complete financial exclusion. And when Maruf Zakaria established the bank for Muslims, he got wiped out also.
Mm.
You know, so this is the issue. What brought Malaysia to where it is today,
So
economic.
so so the point, one of the again thing is when we talk about like creating money out of anything, right?
Yeah,
And then this
out of
modern,
nothing else.
fiat currency,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
printing it
yeah.
out of thin air, right? And then like one of the concepts or the argument that Islamic finance has is this, the new concept in the capitalist economy of GDP. And they're
Mm,
saying, well, the government is backing it up based on the GDP, right?
mhm.
And and this obsession with GDP and whatever that means. Because in GDP, even when we're talking about financial products,
Yeah,
right? Whether we're
correct.
talking about stock markets, whether we're talking about bonds, and all of these different financial products, they are not actually contributing anything to the economy.
No,
Because
no.
economy essentially just comes from, essentially manufacturing, like whatever you're producing, whatever you produce, whether that is agriculture, whether that is, clothes, whether that's, software or anything like that, right? The products, you make the products and that becomes your essential
Yeah,
economy, right?
correct, correct.
So how do you, handle that argument?
That argument is very simple. When you say the government is backing by the GDP and so on, it's not backing. Whenever we say backing, the money there must be redeemable for it. So in other words, when the money is backed by gold or silver, you can actually bring the currency note to the central bank and then
Get
redeem.
the gold.
That is backing. But if you notice, when the introduction of fiat money, did it increase the economic growth of the country? Yes, actually. Why? Because it provides a lot of liquidity, easy to trade and things like that. It brings up the economic growth. But you have to see how the economic growth is distributed.
Hmm.
The wealth that is distributed is actually mostly owned by a small group of people. The rest of the
Venture
guys,
capitalists, right?
the rest of the person is just a slave.
Hmm.
You know, so you don't talk about it, the distribution of the wealth.
Hmm.
We only say, oh, the GDP is growing. You see, yeah, the GDP is growing, but in the hands of very few people, those who control the monetary system, and those who are affiliated with the monetary system, they become extremely wealthy. So in this system, what happens is that it will create ultra rich elite.
Hmm.
Majority of the people will be just, living from paycheck to paycheck. You
So
know,
so yeah.
yeah, this is the issue, and it's not very clear that this is how the capitalism will end. When you see like, what's happening in America, you see the homelessness and things like, and then the shrinking population. That is how it will happen everywhere. It is happening in Japan now. It is happening even in the Scandinavians, and in beginning in Malaysia now.
Hmm. So one of
You
the
see,
things is from like a political perspective and the government perspective, when we talk about the banking, and one of the arguments or the questions they have is how will we do international trade, right? uh,
Mm.
and because is it even possible with decolonization of economy? Is that even possible with IMF and the World Bank and all of these central banks? And whenever you have to like trade internationally, like maybe like we talk about in contemporary terms, we talk about BRICS, and they're developing their own currency. And how can we resolve that? Because these are some of the questions that they have.
Basically, if you see before the fiat monetary system, before there was international trade using gold, silver, and so on.
Right.
But today, with the electronic payment system that we have, we can actually leverage on it, and we can do fantastic trade actually, even using gold and silver as money. Why? We can, remember I told you that one of the systems that we can implement is the netting system.
Mm.
You know, commercial barter trades. You have heard about commercial barter trades. It exists even in many countries. Just Google and see. Even Western countries, there are so many commercial barter trades. What are those? Well, I'm a country. I'll export something to you. Let's say
Mm.
I import to you. I can import maybe oil from another country, and that country with between the, so we can form a network of trading
Mm.
countries, and then we
Oh.
can
Mm.
measure, and then we can just net off all the things that we are we just need something to measure the value of the goods that we are exporting and importing.
And then we can balance the balance
Oh, yeah.
sheets, right? Accounts,
Correct.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So we
Interesting.
go for that, and we only have to use what you call that gold or silver as or any other commodity as a unit
As a reference
to
point, as a measuring device.
measure value. Exactly. That is the thing that I visualize, that where how
Mm.
we should go, so that we are not cheated. If
And that's
someone
how it used to be. That's how it used to be.
You take Saudi Arabia. Okay, I export petroleum to the US. So I should get something real from the US.
Mm.
But what they give me is just an electronic record as US dollar, petrodollar, which is created out of nothing. You see that?
Right,
So
right, right.
in the Muslim world, we are losing a lot of the resources. You look at Indonesia, there's
And
so much of gold and things like that, just gone like that, by taking all these electronic records as currencies.
I think this is again like one of the points is when we talk about like say developing countries, what we
Hmm.
actually mean is economically colonized because
Colonize, colonize. Colonize. So you see, you notice, before we were given independence, after being colonized, they make sure that central bank is established. So the
mm,
control throughout the world is actually through the monetary. It is the riba system. Riba is the tool. Period. How they even, for example, if you see between Israel and Palestine,
mm,
when they had the Oslo Accord. So one of the conditions in the Oslo Accord is that the Palestinian authorities, they must accept the Israeli shekel as a currency.
mm.
So I
Like
told one,
because
yeah,
economic.
correct. So I told one of our Palestinian friends, the moment you agree to that, you have already signed your defeat. You produce your palm oil, your olive oil, and things like that, all the works, and they will just take all your 1 year of work by just giving you an electronic record with your banking system, which they create out of nothing. So it's not
So
shekel. It's an economy, your shekel.
and
Yeah.
again coming back to the colonization and then this concept of constitution, we should talk about constitution, which in my opinion again is something that we never had, and it is an Islamic. And a lot of new constitutions, central banking and this global capital system, they're part of it, right? The IMRs and the loans, they're part of the constitutions. And as you mentioned, even in this Oslo Accords, like, they always try to build in or merge the these nuances, but normally people, they don't understand eh, the long-term strategic impacts of them.
Correct. Hmm. True. That's why, brother Reza, if you look at it globally also, the game that's being played, it's all
Mhm.
actually on the monetary this thing. You see, remember in the last podcast, I mentioned that the destruction of Iraq and
Mm,
and the elimination of Saddam, including even Libya and Gaddafi, because they were actually giving a threat to the dollar as the dominant currency, the
mm,
petrodollar,
mm.
and the American hegemony lies in the petrodollar, the fiat.
But isn't
They want
that didn't like the Saudis recently unpack the oil with that the petrodollar?
petrodollar is
That's
simply the Saudi must sell the oil, Saudi oil in dollar.
in the
That's
dollar
all.
in the US dollars, yeah.
Right. So,
But
for
I thought like
example,
I think like they just did not renew that. Recently they
recently,
canceled
yeah,
it.
that's why recently they mentioned, but the structure is still there, isn't it?
Hmm.
The structure is still there. I tell you, even though
Well,
they didn't renew or whatever, America make sure that Saudi will follow that, because otherwise
mm,
they
yeah,
will wipe out like what they did uh, to Saddam.
mm.
Excuse
One
me.
other important topic, and I was just as you're talking about the dates and the centuries, right? You talk
Mm.
about the 1850s and the 60s in Malaysia, but 1850s was also where the Ottoman Empire they accepted their first loan on interest from I guess the England or the English bank, right? And
When
the
was that?
fall of
1850?
I think it was 1854 or 55 or something like that, maybe like 1850s or 60s, I think.
Ah,
Right after the Tanzimat, right? Tanzimat was in 1820s, right? And this happened somewhere in between 1850s. But my point being is, even Ottoman Empire, the impact of this economic system, it fell in like 50 years.
yes, exactly. You see, you notice in my this thing, the moment you have involved in riba this thing,
You're
the
done.
actually God is no longer with you. You
Right.
become enemy to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as mentioned. So he will just wipe you out.
And same thing with the if you talk about subcontinent and the Mughal Empire in the
Ah,
1857, right? 1857 is when what they call, the war of the uh, I cannot think of the name of it, but 1857 was the war where,
mm,
they fought against the British, but again, British came as the East Indian Company, which I think eventually became the HSBC, right, or something.
yeah, true.
Mhm. Right.
But for the Ottoman Empire, I'm not sure about when you mentioned 1850s. That means within that 1850, is it? You mean 54, yeah?
Yeah, that's what I think it was. It was
Yeah.
somewhere in 1850s, I believe.
Okay, if you say 1854, then it's about 70 years only before the Ottoman Caliphate
Fell.
collapsed.
Right.
Yeah. But there's a book called Gold for the Sultan. Have you heard about the book?
No, goal for Sultan.
Gold for the Sultan. They mention exactly when and how much was borrowed from the British.
Hmm.
And then they mention at one point the interest portion they had to pay the Ottoman Caliphate. The interest portion was more than half the GDP of the Ottoman Caliphate.
Hmm.
Can you imagine? More than half of the GDP. So if you bring your economy to that kind of situation, then.
But my point being is how quickly right after that, because if we been talk about like the Ottoman Caliphate,
Yeah.
1820s, the Western bureaucratic system or the Tanzimat was kind of started to implement, and then you had the 1800 1850s or 1854, I believe, was when they took the first loan again on interest. 1875 they had the Constitution, and then
Mm,
like the Young Turks and everything like that. So like the pretty much the whether that was in the Indian subcontinent or in Africa or here Malaysia or Indonesia, it was pretty much the same thing
right.
in the
Yes.
same time frame too.
So I'm saying, yeah, it's all in that period. You're right. 18 something until any. So it
Yeah.
has given them an immense power over the globe by controlling that. So that's why, and then to control all nations, they have this World Bank and IMF. So when recently, Uganda, when they say, when World Bank was saying, okay, we're not going to lend to Uganda, I said, good, good, don't take, don't take.
It's better for you in the long term, yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly, recently they mentioned World Bank. Okay, anyway, Uganda refused to follow something they requested, I forgot what was that. And then
Hmm.
they said, okay, never mind, we'll still lend to Uganda.
Well, they
The
have to, right?
moment,
They have to.
the
They have to
moment
put the
you
bait in
take
here.
the loan, the moment you take the loan, then you're actually signing your own quote unquote death.
That sentence,
That's
yeah. Or the
why,
club does.
that's, yes, as a nation, we should not borrow. Individuals can borrow. You know why? If I'm currently, let's say I fall sick and I have no savings, then I can borrow from friends or somebody. And in
Hmm.
Islamic concept, you can borrow, but not at interest. Okay? And
And
you
even
cannot,
borrowing is not a good thing. Like, if somebody passes
yes,
away when they have
correct,
the
correct.
loan, you know.
Exactly. Borrowing is not a good thing, but if it is necessary, for survival purposes, you are allowed to. You're allowed to, but not at interest. And the person who's lending, you cannot put a time frame. Okay, I lend you money, you give back at even the same amount 1 year later.
Hmm.
You cannot put a condition like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, Professor Nyazi nicely clarifies that the time that you put, the person must pay back is actually is riba. Because you do not know when the person's economic well-being will become better off to pay you back your loan.
Hmm.
You don't have the idea. So you cannot put the time when the person must give back.
Are
So
there like
that's
any traditional like classical Islamic scholars who have written on this topic?
yes.
Sorry.
Professor Nyazi refers everything to classical scholars.
Hmm. Okay.
Mm. You know?
Yeah, because I know like there's a school of thought of like Mufti
No, no.
Taqi Usmani and all
He-
that, but
No, no, no. He uses all classical scholars, because they are I tell you, they are the best.
hmm.
So you need to look into, those things. Get his book.
Hmm.
That will, okay,
Yes.
go into deeper into the concept of riba. So this is, so okay, if I may just continue, I'm going to finish
Sure.
already. Huh?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It
No,
was a
no
very
problem. It's
interesting
good.
discussion.
It's good. So if you modern this thing, if you look at a typical statement of a financial position, like what we call in those days balance sheet, yeah.
Yes.
You see, you see we are mixing real things with virtual things. Today we have land, buildings, equipment, stocks, all are real things, but the cash is actually virtual. It's something that is not real.
Hmm.
So we are adding virtual and non-virtual things together and balancing our account. You know, for example, I here there's a $300,000 worth of land. So if a bank creates 300,000 out of nothing, the next second, that money and this land will have equal value. See that? So
Right.
this is where the policy starts by equating, virtual things with real things. Now I want to show one more thing because we're talking about effect on political this thing, yeah, political fiat money and political this thing. One thing is this one. I want to show you this fiat money plus the limited liability law. How interest groups can play with this, yeah. For example, let's say, doctor, let's say I have some interest group. I may be politically, involved. I may be a politician. All right. I have
Hmm.
my all you need is you have your people as a loan officer in a bank.
Hmm.
Yeah. So would usually approve your projects or whatever. All right. So once you have a project, your business and things like that approved by this, money is created out of nothing and given to you, right? So what you do is the money is basically circulated mostly among your group people only. As much as possible, you circulate the money within your group. Only when you do not have someone providing a good or services within your group, then only the money can go out. Else you do all within your group. Okay, you create money out of nothing and then you just circulate within your group, right? Now let's say someone in your group is doing business and then suddenly the business was, incurred loss.
Hmm.
So you will be still protected through the limited liability law. It won't go after your personal wealth and things like that.
Hmm.
Okay, the business fails, so you whatever the business has, it will be settled within that.
mm,
It doesn't come to you, and ask for payment. So the limited liability law kind of protects losses and things like that. So if you do like that, you create money and then you circulate within your group, and then there are laws to protect you if any loss happens. So the wealth of your people and things will grow, and your power will grow, and you can use that kind of thing to influence political outcomes and things like that. So this is what is happening throughout the world today with the use of international lending agencies and so on. These people who control the global monetary system, they actually create huge amount of money out of nothing. They circulate the money within themselves, within their groups, making them so very wealthy, and all other people simply work for them. And you, at the same time, they can use the tremendous wealth created to influence political outcomes and things like that, not only in their own country, but also overseas. So this is how, the fiat monetary system is being used today, as I see it. And that is their power.
mm.
So we Muslims, we cannot establish back even, the true Islamic systems back again until we correct this situation. Because we are actually financing our own destruction in this system.
I think one of the most critical um, point for this is self-sustainability, right? For
Yeah,
production and China model, how China developed in the past 40, 50 years is is
yeah,
is a prime example of that, how they developed more of
yeah,
self-sustainability, and they started producing, they started manufacturing. Not only that, that increased their skill set of their labor class or their
yes,
labor, right? And their overall product. But again, now it's more of a, it is become not only an economic power, but also military power,
yes,
And I
correct.
think one of the things we, as you said, like in the barter system or the netting system, one has to be self-sustainable at some level so they can, and again, like essentially it is food, water, clothing, and all of this stuff.
Brother Reza, if you compare China and let's say Malaysia and other places, you know what is the big difference when what I was saying?
Yeah,
For example, in this interest groups and things like that, in China, the major banking system is actually controlled by the government itself.
right.
So the government
It's
is
not
the
privatized.
yes, it is the major interest group, the government itself.
Mm.
So they make sure everything is done according to the interest the government wants. Unlike the present system, it is private banks, private banks creating money. Therefore, you can put somebody of your people into the loan office or whatever. The game being played is different, slightly different. But if you follow
Big difference.
yeah, if you follow the China model, it's good.
Right.
But that's why among the first thing I always tell people, what we do, first thing where we can do, the first thing we can do is actually at least nationalize the banks.
Mm.
So that if money is created out of nothing, it is created in the interest of the people, not any private group.
And like
So
you talked about, like it is an aggregated interest because they have to like paying back and paying back and never
correct.
ends. It never ends. It's like for infinity. And
Yeah.
I think you mentioned how big a trillion is, right? Like, what was that? Like, if you pay a
Yes,
billion
yes,
dollars a day, it takes like 1,000 years or something.
correct. Yes. For more than 3,000 years.
Wow.
1 million every day for more than 3,000 years, that's 1 trillion. And these people are now controlling many, many trillions. Even just in the derivatives market, about 1,000 trillion is being parked there. See, 1,000 trillion. So they can easily take some of the money and they can influence political outcome in that country in Africa, this country and this.
Right.
And everybody accepts the dollar as the international currency. You see, this is how the game is being played.
Hmm.
Very difficult to beat the system unless we say no to this fiat monetary system.
Hmm.
Like for example, here also, Brother Reza, I want to show you see this is Penang Island. This is the peninsula Malaysia, Penang,
Hmm.
Malacca here, and Singapore here. These are the ones
Right.
initially. So because of the banking systems in place here and the money were initially given to the other races and so on, the population of Malays in the urban areas are falling. they pushed out. They keep being pushed out to the rural areas, So this is one of the things that you will see in such a situation. So urban areas, you do not find any more Malaysia in the rural areas because once you are financially excluded for more than 100 years ago, yeah.
Mm,
So so this one all I mentioned already. So I mentioned that the riba-based monetary system is the tool behind all this, yeah.
mm,
Um, So just to give you, what is the current still the effects, One is the inflation is still there and ever increasing cost of living, which is not only here but throughout the world, because the monetary system is same almost in every other nation,
mm,
But in the Malaysian case is unique a bit because the Malays were 100 years financially excluded by the system.
mm,
They
mm,
put them far behind, yeah. Then rising and unaffordable home prices, and then greatly widening wealth and income distribution gap. That means the system is creating a small number of us ultra rich elite. And accordingly, you also see a rising number of young bankrupts. Their age is only 20 something, is already bankrupt, declared bankrupt. So these are, and then in my opinion, it is disproportionately affects the Malay youth.
mm.
Disproportionately affects the Malay youth. I can see the Chinese youth, I can see the Indian youth and so on, but the Malays are more affected, by the system. And then this is quite important. I do not know whether I mentioned this in the last, when you look at it from Maqasid Sharia perspective, there are five Maqasid, yeah?
Yes.
Protection of faith, life, intellect, our next generation, posterity, and wealth. So wealth is one of and they're all linked. They're all linked. So in the present fiat monetary system, we cannot protect our wealth. Just like the Malays lost their land, we lost our economic dominance and so forth. So once you cannot protect your wealth, then it will affect your other maqasid. You know, it can affect your faith also. You
Right.
know, so that's why there's a hadith also saying poverty leads to kufr.
Mm,
You know, so this when then you can lead to kufr. Yeah, that's why I never and then it can you may not be able to protect your life. That means once you lose the sovereignty of your nation, your life is in other people's hand.
mm,
Intellect even dictate what should be the curriculum of your universities and schools.
absolutely.
Yeah, and your posterity, next generation. So protection of wealth is equally important, and it's one of the maqasid of Sharia. And then it affects, yeah. So riba transfers wealth and power. Wealth and power are the domains of a political economy. It transfers wealth and power of individuals, companies, and governments to those who create fiat money. So this is where the international game is being played by institutions, financial institutions like World Bank, IMF. So the moment our governments borrow, then this is what will happen. You actually transfer your wealth and power of the nation gradually to these institutions, because
Mm,
they create money. So the action needed is we must halt this destructive trend of any and reverse the trend. So what needs to be done, or what need to be done? I will, I mentioned. You see, the first thing is nationalized banks,
mhm,
just like China. China, most of the large banks are government owned, so they are able to control the economy much better. But because the system has created so much of debt in the system, individuals, businesses, and governments become debtors, in the system. Only the banking system that creates money out of nothing, they are the creditors. You need to start with debt cancellation. You know, the
mm.
Michael Hart, the economist that who used to advise Reagan, I think.
Okay.
He wrote a book, The Lost Tradition of Biblical Debt Cancellation. The lost tradition of the biblical debt cancellation. So we need debt cancellation. If you ask me today, because the system has created ultra rich elites at the expense of the majority of the people, you need to cancel the debt of the people, businesses, and governments and give everybody a clean slate and start afresh again. So we need to give the biblical debt cancellation. They call it the Jubilee, the Jubilee year. Apparently, in the Jewish tradition, it happens every 50 years or so.
Oh, really? Okay. So they just cancel all the old debts,
All
discard
that,
all.
yeah, start all over. And then the number three is because the system has also not only accumulated money in their hands, but also the ownership of land, buildings, and so forth. So what the government may need to do is that you may also have to, take possession of all land, properties in the land, redistribute back to the people, right? Redistribute back to the people, and also introduce a new money concept. Cancel all their debts, everybody. You create new money and give to people the new money, and then you start all over again. After that, whoever works hard, you accumulate more wealth, then it's fine. But in the present structure, most of the wealth is accumulated through the policy of this monetary system. Okay, that's why I'm saying that we need to take possession and redistribute wealth. So the solutions look a bit radical, look radical, but the world has come to a situation like that. If you want to, you need to reset the economy. Believe me, brother Reza, this is what is happening by even Israel and others attacking Iran. The
Mm,
actual objective, like one person, recently in one YouTube, he said this, but I knew this even before he said that. The objective is to actually they want to destroy the global economic order and the monetary system, financial system, and establish a new one that controls everybody.
mm,
They might use something called, central bank digital money and so forth. Anything digital, but it's going to be fiat, so that they can control the world. But whether they'll be able to do it is another thing. But I think that is the objective because they are in the present dynamics, they are losing their grip on the economic dominance and monetary dominance, especially through BRICS.
right.
The real challenge is what is happening in attacking is basically ultimately to get at BRICS China.
Mm,
So that's my view. So the once you have the debt cancellation, take possession, redistribution of wealth, you need to eliminate riba and introduce a new monetary system that's based on real money. We can use, as I mentioned in the last unit, we can use gold, we can use silver, we can use petroleum, whatever. Multiple commodities as monetary units, but all are real money, no more fiat money.
mm,
And, revive zakat, awqaf, sadaqah, hiba. We need to encourage this because when you put a system like this, the Islamic system and zakat and wakaf, so they provide social security even to the poorest in the give them free education, everything guaranteed, health guaranteed for everyone. So you create a social order like that, economic order like that. You know, while if you're hardworking, you can accumulate wealth. But if you are someone is unfortunate, you may be disabled and things like that. There's a system that really takes care of you. And then number six is to make it sustainable and so that there'll be continuity. We need to integrate in education in our system where science skills and things like that are integrated with religious knowledge and character building, ethics, and
mm.
so forth. So this is important, like what the
That is
Japanese
very
model.
important. That is what, our education used to be about tarbiyah, right? It was all about character building.
Mm. So I always visualize this. What I would like to visualize is a Japanese education model,
Mm,
but that has religion inside. If you ask me
absolutely.
what is missing in the Japanese education from my perspective, there's no religion, there's no God in the system. But they create good behavior in people, good science and technology skills, you know.
Mm.
So we need to come up with a system that puts in religion in the Japanese model. And I found one school, one such a school in northern Thailand. I think I mentioned to you, right?
Yes.
One school like that in northern Thailand that integrates the Japanese education with Islamic.
Oh,
I
really?
went, I went to visit the school. It's fantastic. They're doing very well.
What is
And
it called?
it's called, the name is um, Santitam Vitaya School is a Thai word.
Thai name.
Santitam Vitaya School is an Islamic school. But you know what? I was surprised when I went there. When I was really shocked to learn. 90% of the students are Buddhists.
Wow.
I asked the teacher, how come, it's an Islamic school and 90% are students Buddhists? First, he said, yes, majority of the people in that city are Buddhists, right? But why the parents chose to send their children to the school is because of the character building in the school.
जरा
Character building. The Japanese character
ऊपर
building
से
has,
देखना हमारे बैकयार्ड में कोई है हमारा पीछे जो वो है सॉरी
so basically that's the thing, brother Reza.
sorry I thought somebody was in the backyard this night so I want to just make sure there's nobody here
Oh, okay, okay.
yeah
Easy. So basically, as for Malaysia, a little bit of affirmative actions are still needed for the Malays, in my opinion. That means a greater financial inclusion of Malays and Muslims are needed more. That means, and then especially Malaysia's oil and gas revenue could be used for assisting the economically deprived ones. But one thing it is affecting Malaysia is that government is still borrowing money from World Bank and
Mhm.
and IMF and things like that. So that is the negative thing because when you go and borrow from these international institutions, you will ultimately you will lose. You're going to give
Mhm.
away the national wealth to them. Now, as I mentioned to you earlier, remember that I mentioned as individuals I can borrow, but not as a nation. That means if you borrow money from internationally, from IMF, World Bank, all these institutions, you're basically telling the entire economy is sick. We are unable to produce economically, therefore we need to borrow money from outside.
Mhm.
That is the meaning when a nation borrows money from outside. And if you ask me why we are forced to borrow like this, because we are in a fiat monetary system and we have not implemented like netting systems and so forth. If you implement netting systems, then we will not have to even go in and borrow money. So for our leaders, our people, scholars, everyone must understand the concept of money. We may need to understand what actually riba is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has threatened believers with war if we enter into ribawi transactions. So if a nation itself goes and involves in riba, then the people will suffer. As you mentioned, if you ask me, that is the reason why the Ottoman Caliphate collapsed and many um,
Muslim
and if you notice, empires that lasted for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and so forth in history, you will find those are empires. They will establish real money concepts. They will have real money in their system, and they will be against riba. That means interest financing. And these are the kind of empires that lasted for 2,000 or 3,000 years before some fellow will come and
Mhm.
and start involving in riba. So you go back and say, the history of empires. You'll notice that. Okay,
Absolutely.
so I think, brother, I think basically I will stop the
Thank you
discussion.
so much, Professor. I know you have to go as well, and I
Mhm.
do. Thank you so much again for this very uh, beneficial and very engaging, very interesting, frank conversation about the not only the economic system of the world, but like the current state of the ummah and how we
Yeah,
can probably try to decolonize our mindset and have solutions,
correct.
that could be actually implemented, that we can, decolonize the global south as well.
So we need to decolonize our monetary system first
Absolutely.
before we can establish anything that's truly Islamic. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much.
So
Jazakumullah khair.
the Reza, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa
Thank you
barakatuh.
so much. Thank you. Inshallah, we will continue to have this discussion. I know there's like few more that we need to have. And thank you so much. Jazakumullah khair. And we will, hope everything goes well with you and your health and everything is good, inshallah. And we will, inshallah, connect soon again.
Assalamu
Assalamu alaikum.